Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
And welcome all across fantasy land. It is the Fantasy Football Hustle. I'm your host, Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com. Joined as always by the analytical assassin, Dwain McFarland of Establish the Run, PFF. There's 8,000 other sites that pay him to do work, I'm sure, on the side. But Dwain, what's going on, my friend? How are you tonight?
Only two, Drake. Only two. Don't get me in trouble with, like my quasi boss here.
The man's so nice, they pay him for his good play. So, the reason you guys are all tuning in tonight, and we welcome you in, thank you, first of all, is because we have the man, the myth, the legend, Evan Silva, co-founder of Establish the Run. You know him from his work over the past years. He was dominating at Roto World, and he's a household name in fantasy football. And the reason Evan is here is because his ideas, his thoughts on fantasy football shifts ADP. It forms hive mindset out there in the fantasy landscape. And we want you guys all to head over to ETR, establishtheRun.com. Check out their draft kit. I did it myself. I'm not plugging this because, hey, Evan's on the show. I bought it with my own money, $34.99. You get a $25 coupon to the FFPC to get into the league there. You're going to get rankings, all of Evan's tiers, which we're going to talk about tonight, team previews, Brandon Thorne's offensive line rankings, which we'll reference tonight, best ball content, lots and lots of more stuff. And also, of course, check out the podcast he does with Adam Levitan. I listen to every episode as I'm cutting my grass and getting stung by ground hornets, but that's neither here nor there. So welcome to this show, Evan. Thanks for taking time out to talk to us here on The Hustle.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Really excited to chop it up with Dwain and you, Brian, talking running back tiers tonight.
Yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to talk running backs. We're going to mix in some draft strategy. Both of these folks put out great content in terms of running back rankings and, more importantly, running back tiers. So when you're drafting, are you looking down, Evan's got his 150 list. Are you pulling that out and just kind of crossing names off? Or are you also pairing that up with tiers to say like, all right, well, if the last guy here is gone, maybe I'm going to pivot and I'm going to go to a different position. So we'll get into all that tonight as we go through the running backs. So let's start off. First of all, you guys are pretty solid here in your rankings. I had both up on my screen. Dwain's work over at PFF and, of course, yours at Establish the Run. McCaffrey, Barkley, Zeke, Kamara, Cook. That's your first basic tier. Anything you want to tell the folks who are just getting back into fantasy right now about these guys? Anyone you prefer as you're going through that top five, Evan?
Well, I think that this top five should make up essentially your top five picks in a season-long redraft league. I think that what I would like to hear Dwain comment on, and I just made the move to put Derrick Henry into the first tier didn't move his overall ranking, still have him as the RB6, but I did move him into the first tier. Why should he not belong in the first tier, Dwain? And then I think I have a counter argument.
Yeah, so the way I have it tiered, I have the same five, just like what you said, Drake. And what's interesting, about Henry is I have him in tier 3. And so the way I label and this isn't necessarily, so the way I work my tiers, these are all RB1s, right? But my tier 2 and tier 3 are basically like up to you. I'm going to lay out, here's how it can look. Here's why I would take these guys. So my tier 2, which we'll talk about in a minute, is really, you have a path to elite utilization, but you're unproven, right? We'll get to them in a minute. But then my tier 3 is basically your everything but the passing down duties. And I have Derrick Henry, sitting there. So as far as, attempts, no concerns about Henry. He's going to get 70 to 75% of the carries inside the 5. We know he's explosive. He's good for big plays. He was still, I believe, I'd have to go back and look at my notes again. He was the third most game script dependent back last year, over those first 8 or 9 games, which I did own him on a few teams. I wasn't very happy. Thank God on one of them, I was actually still hanging around when he turned it on in typical Henry fashion. But I do have a note within my tier specifically on Henry, just calling out that, look, the Dion Lewis snaps are open. Darrington Evans is a rookie. we don't know if he's going to be trusted or if he's even, maybe he gets half the work that Dion Lewis, received before. So it'll be interesting to see. Darrington Evans is a guy that I'm definitely paying attention to the news on. I want to hear, what kind of sets is he getting into? What kind of role can he potentially have? And it's going to be crazy this year trying to figure all that out, Evan, because we won't really get any kind of, not that preseason games always give us the stamp of approval, but it just feels like one more data point we can at least get our arms around. And so I think if that happens, or even if he takes over half of Dion Lewis's, I'm with you. And that's actually the note I have in my tier. If that happens, he belongs in tier 1.
Now, what's your counter argument on that?
No, I think that we're sort of in lockstep, to a great extent there. But yeah, I'm even more bullish on Derrick Henry, though, I would say, from a passing game standpoint. And I mean, I don't think that he's going to catch, 60 or 70 balls this year, obviously. The team isn't going to even throw enough for that to be a possibility, I don't think. But, again, like, not only is Darrington Evans a late 3rd round pick, but he also is coming from Appalachian State. That's quite a leap to come up and fill all of the duties that were left behind from Dion Lewis. So I think that there's actually a better chance of Derrick Henry being a true every down back than general ADP would have you to believe. And so, therefore, he is a part of my first running back tier. I also love the schedule for the Titans. The Titans drew the second softest schedule based on 2020 opponent win totals this year. That plays directly into the hands of a running back that is somewhat or highly game script dependent, as Dwain pointed out. In his career, Derrick Henry has averaged 5.8 yards per carry when playing with a lead and 4.1 when playing from behind. And I think that he is a back that, excels the more he gets the ball because I truly think that he can wear down a defense, and getting him out into space on screen passes is one of the best plays that the Titans can have in their playbook, because though nobody want to tackle Derrick Henry out in space, no 230-pound linebacker, no 210-pound safety, certainly no 190-pound cornerback. And I think that the Titans are going to make more use of that this year, and therefore getting Derrick Henry potentially into that 35 catch range.
Yeah, I agree. I think what people can think about Drake, because, and I'm not trying, obviously Derrick Henry is better than this player, but, it was similar with, Leonard Fournette to some extent. And then all of a sudden last year, and again, to Evan's point, the way this offense runs, he's not going to catch 70 balls, but he could have the opportunity. And if he does just catch 30 to 35, that's really all you need to kind of stabilize the bottom end, right? Where he has those weeks. And Drake, we've talked about it. We've done the utilization reports where we've put up, these are the kind of games, right, where it directly correlates with, Henry has problems. But if now all of a sudden you can tack onto the bottom of that, 3 receptions, in those games for 20 to 30 yards, it goes a long way. It keeps you from dropping down into the RB3 range for the week to staying in the RB2 range, and you're much less volatile.
Last year, he had 24 targets, caught 18 balls. What really was the saving grace for him, 1,540 yards, 16 touchdowns. That's unbelievable. That helped a lot of you guys down the stretch. Thanks to our guy, Darren Armani, Fantasy Mojo. Let's look at the ADP and FFPC best ball. Just over the last 4 days, Derrick Henry's going off the board on average at 1.8. So, Michael Thomas is just ahead of him, and that's going to lead me to my next thought. You get through those big 5 running backs. Evan, when do you start to consider in a 12-team PPR league saying, you know what, let me take a shot on Michael Thomas here? And if you're at the back end, do you even say, hey, maybe I want Kittle or Kelsey?
I really have leaned more toward running backs early, in large part due to the positional scarcity, in large part due to the strong running back thirst this year, and placing an emphasis on coming out of my first 2 rounds with at least one RB1, and then ideally an RB1 and an RB2. Really emphasize flexibility up top in our drafts, but coming out of the first and second rounds with 2 RB1s ideally, I think is still the optimal strategy when all said and done.
So, of course, we all know Jesus has come back to earth in human form, and his name is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because that's all anybody can talk about in fantasy football these days. We know Damian Williams opted out. So, we got CEH here. You guys both have him as your RB6 in your rankings right now. Dwayne's got him in a tier called Path to Elite Utilization, but Unproven, with guys like Kenyon Drake and Miles Sanders. Evan, what do we think of CEH? Is he worthy of, you have him at running back 6. Would you take him at 6 overall in the draft? We saw him in I think it was a Pros versus Joes, might have gone 1 overall. And there's a lot of folks out there. Dwayne and I mentioned this before, and I'd love to know if you see this with site traffic. I talked to a bunch of guys in my random frat guy college league, that most people play in with your buddies. I've had so many guys tell me they're not even into fantasy football right now because they don't think there's going to be a season. So I think you're going to get a jump on all these jabronis in your league who aren't paying attention when you stroll up there and then at the 112 slap CEH on the board and they're like, oh man, who's this guy?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has a ton of touchdown equity playing in that offense. Obviously, Damian Williams opting out boosted him from our RB14 to RB7. And the touchdown and the receptions equity, I think make him a true top 7 pick. I actually have my first top 8, my opening top 8 overall players are all running backs. Mm-hmm. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the number 7, and Miles Sanders is the number 8.
Dwayne, when we're talking CEH, Drake, Miles Sanders, we're getting maybe that middle back end of the first round. Is there a preference for those guys? Again, folks that are just starting to get back into fantasy, they're prepping for drafts. You got them coming up in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. Let's talk about those guys and the path to greatness for these underutilized guys that you say, or unproven, excuse me. I love Drake. If I could start a draft at the back end, and I have actually the 12th pick in that draft we referenced, if I can start Drake Sanders, to me, that's a home run. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, no, I'm all in, on Helaire. I will say I was on Matt Waldman's pod this weekend and we were doing a projection series, and Matt actually gave me probably the best rebuttal I've heard so far, which, Matt can often do. He watches so much film, but he's given me the best rebuttal so far as to why he's not taking Edwards-Helaire in the top 12. Now, he didn't do enough to get me off of my take, but he definitely, the way I took the conversation, and that's what I told him on the show, I was like, I think what you just gave me is what I probably think is his floor, and that there might be a more realistic path, to that floor, than what I think. So it just had to do with some of, the traits of Edwards-Helaire compared to, some of the other runners outside of Kareem Hunt that have actually done really well, and going back to even Brian Westbrook, we talked a lot about that. So some really good stuff from Matt there, but I have Edwards-Helaire as my RB6, unless, of course we hear Darrington Evans, is not going to have a role. I think Evans right. I may just need to go ahead and put him as my 6 anyway. I took him to be fair and just be honest with people on the show. In a draft this last week, in a Fantasy Football Guys Players Championship draft, I took him at 6. Now I'm wanting exposure too. I don't have a ton of Henry right now, so I took him at 6 over Edwards-Helaire. But having said that, yeah, I'm fine with having him at 6, and I have him at the top of this tier. So I've got Edwards-Helaire, Kenyon Drake, Miles Sanders, and I don't think everybody needs me to go back and tell them how good Andy Reid's offense is. I think most people know. 2010 through 2019, here are the ranks. Whenever that running back has played, at least 12 games, 3, 2, 16, 1, 7. There's a 51 in 2015 that didn't have somebody, but 2016 is 16. Then 2017, Kareem Hunt comes on the scene. There's 4. And then 12 in 2018. And then last year for Damian Williams, had he stayed healthy, he was averaging 17.2 points per game in a small sample given, but that would have been good enough to also be in the top 12. So, a lot of it just goes with Reid. I love the fit with Edwards-Helaire, with the Chiefs, with their scheme. They love to run the inside and outside zone. Edwards-Helaire graded out as the top inside zone runner in college football last year, according to PFF. And then Andy Reid has said as much. whenever you start seeing these data points line up with what the coach is saying, I take heed. If it's something where what the coach is saying is very contrary to what we know, then sometimes I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. But when you look at, everything, Reed has said about Edwards-Helaire, I would be very surprised, Drake, if he didn't have at least, 60, 65% of the carries. I think, he's going to be in the 10% target range in a really, really good offense. I think the one area where you could see him get some relief would be, down inside the 5. That's the one area over all of these years where Reed has shown a willingness to use another back, right, and get another guy into play. So if you look at the inside the 5 attempts, for Reed's backs, and what you really want, Drake, we've talked about this on the show, an RB1 is typically around 65%. If you look at, like 2019 weekly averages, but his inside the 5 attempts, to his backs have been 16%, 34%. There were 75% to Kareem Hunt, but then 46, 38, 44. So he is willing to get another back involved down inside the 5. But again, that's been going on for forever. And these backs have still been posting, great fantasy points. So, I've baked that in. I'm not one of these guys that has Edwards-Helaire at 12 rushing touchdowns. I think I've got him slotted at 9 or 8 right now. But I still feel great about him, and I definitely put him at the top of the tier, but I'd like to hear what Evan says.
No, I think that my thoughts are similar on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think that he's going to enter the season with a high floor and a high ceiling, because of the offense in which he plays. And, again, I think that he's a top 7 overall pick, regardless of position.
Here's a guy that 2 guys actually that just confound me when I'm looking at fantasy drafts, and I'm doing tons of mocks and looking at the back end, and 2 guys that are always kind of there, mid to late first, and then coming back around the second is Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs. So if you look at Brandon Thorne's offensive line work over at Establish the Run, he has the Raiders with a very good offensive line, and he has the Bengals with an abysmal offensive line. How much do you take that into consideration as maybe a tiebreaker, Evan, when you're looking at which guy you're going to pick? Because we know last year, I think those Mixon numbers were inflated. They were just trying to get back on the bus. They were hiding the quarterback. They're just, let's get out of here and go get the first pick.
Well, I think that if you listen to the recent comments from Brian Callahan, the Bengals offensive coordinator, and if you read that Bengals.com article, which got some buzz this week, the Bengals changed their running game halfway through last season, and they really changed their offense, and they truly committed to Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon over the final 8 games led the NFL in carries, was second behind only Derrick Henry in rushing yards, was outscored by only 3 other backs in fantasy. And I think that the offense is going to be better this year. Pat Thorman, our snaps and pace specialist, expects the Bengals to be an up-tempo team offensively. And what Joe Mixon was able to do over the past 2 years in really bad offensive environments is pretty impressive. Almost 3,000 yards from scrimmage, 17 touchdowns. He has the contract year narrative this year, and it sounds like the Bengals are truly interested in extending him. I think he's a really, really good back, and he's versatile, even more versatile than his numbers show from last year. I think he has room for improvement in the passing game from a production standpoint. And I think the Bengals are going to be a better team this year than they were last year, potentially significantly to where they, go from 2 wins to like 6 or 7. I think they're going to play fast. Joe Burrow played fast at LSU. And I have a pretty high level of comfort drafting Joe Mixon late in the first, certainly early in the second. His offensive environment is not perfect, but I think it's significantly improved from the last 2 years in which he was still, a top 10 fantasy back.
What are your thoughts on Jacobs, Dwain? I know, we're hoping he gets a little more work in the pass game. They did invest, I believe, a 3rd-round pick in Lynn Bowden, and we'll see how they work him into the offense. But it's just like, all right, we keep adding pass catchers here, and it's not like Jacobs was some zero in college catching the football. So it's like, let's go, Gruden. Come on, let's get this
Yeah.
West Coast moving here and get this guy the ball.
Yeah, really, this entire tier that I have a tier, right, that's got, Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, and Joe Mixon in it. And really, essentially, each one of them, the real challenge is for me, I like every one of them as a runner.
Mm-hmm.
But can they get more passing down work? So you heard a quote, I think it was last week. Evan probably knows, which one it was. But, you're hearing some coach speak around, we want to get, Mixon a little more involved in the passing game, whatever a little means. Every little bit would certainly help. I agree with Evan that he actually is probably a plus in the passing game, but for whatever reason, they want to continue to use Gio Bernard there. And there were improvements, like Evan said, for Mixon with the offensive line when they changed the scheme and really leaned on that more. My biggest concern really with Mixon is this: when their drop back rates were high, Mixon didn't do very much because they kept putting Gio Bernard on the field. So when the drop back rate, here are the drop back rates and fantasy points. 80%, he was at a 3.7. 72%, Mixon scores 5.7. 67%, Mixon did get a touchdown that week, 17.5. But then 72%, it's a 10. 63%, it's an 11. 76%, it's a 6. Not until the end of the season, to your point, Drake, when they went heavy run, did that change. And now the improvements with the scheme did definitely help. But my concern is, like what Evan was just talking about, I'm actually anticipating that they're going to go back to throwing the ball more, and that there's going to be a good pace. I'm totally on board with what Pat Thorman has there. But my question becomes, just how much is Gio Bernard going to be involved? I think that's the question. So I'm getting some exposure to Joe Mixon, but not a lot. Like I think I'm, if I were to draft 100 teams, I would probably want Mixon on 10 to 20 of them, but that would be the most. As far as Josh Jacobs goes, I mean, you really already hit it, Drake. I mean, to me, they're telling us they re-signed Jalen Richard.
Mm-hmm.
They bring in Lynn Bowden. John Gruden has a history almost every year of his coaching career, except for I think 2, of relying on multiple backs. He likes to tinker. He likes to use all these different parts. So I think, Josh Jacobs, he could win a rushing title. He's a good enough runner to do that if they could keep scripts right. That's the other thing with these guys. Nick Chubb, would it surprise if he won a rushing title, as talented as he is, and the improvements they made on their offensive line? You bring in Kevin Stefanski. No, but you have Kareem Hunt in the backfield. So for me, these guys are all very similar, very talented players. I like them a lot. Any one of them, I wouldn't be surprised if they won a rushing title. I'm just scared to death of what their passing roles are going to be.
Yeah. Well, you bring up Hunt, you bring up Chubb. Guess who we're going to talk about next? All right. So, like you mentioned about Chubb, I believe going into the final week of the season, he was the leading rusher in the NFL. And then I believe Henry overtook him that week. So, the yardage is there. The last 8 games, when Kareem Hunt played, the guy caught 37 to 44 balls. We all know that he zapped the PPR value away from Nick Chubb. When they were playing together, Chubb RB 15, Hunt RB 17. Now, Evan, you've got Hunt as RB 23. Dwain, you've got him at 29. He's going right now in best ball drafts in the 5th round. Chubb's early 2nd. What are we doing with these two guys? I'm scared to death to invest an early 2nd round pick in Nick Chubb, just seeing how much of that passing game work could be going out the window. So that's why if there's guys in that ballpark, even though the Mixons, the Jacobs, even Eckler if he's hanging around, Drake if he falls, I'm taking all those guys over Nick Chubb. I'm just scared to death. Can you talk me off the ledge, or what are your thoughts on the Browns backfield?
Yeah, it's definitely a conundrum, and I think a lot of people believe in Nick Chubb's talent as a runner. I certainly do. It sounds like Dwain certainly does. I think that if you were going to categorize just the top 3 to 5 pure runners in the NFL, Nick Chubb definitely belongs in there, and I think that Josh Jacobs arguably belongs in there. But as you mentioned, after Kareem Hunt came off suspension last year, Nick Chubb's targets per game went from 4 to 2.1, almost sliced in half. And, I think that the Browns pass attempts are not going to be, voluminous this season in general. And, you have Kareem Hunt eating away at Nick Chubb's passing game potential. So that's why I have Nick Chubb as a second-round pick. And I like Kareem Hunt, although I never get him in drafts. I mean, he always goes before where I would be willing to take him. But I'm 6 spots higher than him or higher on him than Dwain because I like players that have high floors and high ceilings. And I think that Kareem Hunt does have a floor. He averaged 10 touches per game when he came back last year. The Browns didn't need to keep him on a second round tender. They could have kept him on the original pick tender. He was a third round pick. I doubt any NFL team would be willing to sacrifice a third round pick and a decent contract to get Kareem Hunt. But the Browns gave Kareem Hunt a second round tender, showing that I think that shows a level of commitment to using him. And so that is the concern with Nick Chubb. But and then Kareem Hunt's upside comes into play. If Nick Chubb goes down, which he did have a tendency to go down at Georgia, then Kareem Hunt, I think, becomes a league winner.
One of my favorite guys that keeps falling to me in drafts, if I'm at the back half of round one and I take a running back and then maybe you say, let me grab Devontae Adams or something here. Melvin Gordon's a guy that continually comes back to me. I don't know if people just have a bad taste in their mouth because he held out all those games last season. Well, now he's in a new place, Evan. He's in Denver. He did lose his right tackle, Juwan James, who opted out. But this is a guy who can do everything on all 3 downs. He's got Phillip Lindsay there, who's a very talented but smaller back. I think this is a team that wants to pound the rock, play defense. They got a ton of weapons out there, but a really young quarterback in Drew Lock. So maybe you want to feed the ball to Melvin Gordon. What could help him in the passing game, though, is because you're going to have to win some shootouts in that division going against Kansas City twice. So what are your thoughts on Gordon? I just think this is a guy who was a top 10 running back for a few years, and you're getting him at an extreme discount.
Yeah, the offensive line is an issue, but I think the team philosophy is going to be, under Vic Fangio, a defensive mind geared toward trying to pound the rock. And the defense, I think, is the strength of the team. The offense has some explosive elements for sure, especially after the draft. A bunch of rookies that are, they're just going to add explosiveness on offense. But with Melvin Gordon, I think he is going to cede some carries to Phillip Lindsay, who I think is a really talented runner. And so I've just kind of stayed in line with ADP on Melvin Gordon, not taking a super strong or soft stance. I don't know. I think he's a fine RB2. Whenever I draft Melvin Gordon, I don't feel like I crushed my draft, but I think he's a fine RB2.
Yeah, that I'm in the same spot. I don't own Gordon much. I think I maybe own him once or twice. And I've talked to Drake about it. The biggest thing for me, is and in a lot of the drafts I do, he's a back that kind of has a wide range. Like I'll see him go in the middle of the third, and then I'll see him slide to the middle of the fourth. So he kind of has a wide range of where he'll go based on what people think about him. But I think the biggest thing where and I'm 100% with Evan, is people just continue to dismiss Phillip Lindsay, and he's just a good player. If you look at his, at his ability over the first 2 years, of his career, and then you compare that to, a lot of other backs that, we consider to be really good, he's right there with them. So, he just continues to get, discounted, and I think they'll use both guys. I think Melvin Gordon will lead the backfield, obviously, and I think he'll get the receiving work, but it's just enough that I'm like, man, if he doesn't score a few touchdowns, I don't know how good the offense is going to be. It could be something where it's really what Evan just said. I don't feel like I'm winning my draft when I get him, but I don't think Melvin Gordon is going to sink my draft either.
Right in that same ballpark is a player who, if you listen to Evan's podcast with Adam Levitan, again, it's a great podcast. They put out, like 2 a week now. You guys are really starting to crank them out. Excellent content. I highly recommend it. If you like our show, you'll love their show. It's good stuff. Is a guy that you want to be above ADP on, and that's James Conner. If you read your article where you're talking about your tiers, you even mentioned in there, weeks 1 through 8, this guy was on an RB1 pace. You can get him now, according to FFPC Best Ball ADP, middle of the 3rd round. And now does he miss games? Of course. He's only started 22 games in his last 2 years. But with Ben 2 years ago, this is a guy that scored 12 rushing touchdowns, had almost 1,000 yards. I think he was a first-team All-Pro. Like, he was legit. And if you can get him in the middle of the third round, pair him with one of those elite talents in the first round, maybe come back in the second, you get another back or a stud wide receiver. Now we're cooking with some gas with James Conner.
Yeah, through 7 games last year, James Conner was on pace for over 1,400 total yards, 66 catches, and 14 touchdowns. After that, he played 56 snaps the rest of the way. He had knee, shoulder, thigh injuries. But I like his chances of coming back and being healthy. Number one, you've seen the offseason, the pictures of James Conner. He looks
Nobody
like
gets more excited than fantasy Twitter for shirtless running back photos. It's unbelievable.
But I also think that there's some truth to the notion that Ben Roethlisberger is just going to trust him over guys like Benny Snell or Anthony McFarland or even Jalen Samuels, who some Steelers beat writers have talked about that he could get cut. But I think with James Conner, because Ben Roethlisberger is going to, and with these older quarterbacks, I really like to lean on the trust factor because I know that they do. And so I think that James Conner is going to be used as an every down back, until he gets hurt, and he's going to be an elite RB1 potentially producer until that happens. And I like betting on the Steelers' offense. I think that the defense is truly elite at this point, and will put the running back in favorable field position. And I think they're going to come back and score a lot of points. And James Conner is going to be a very big part of that. And I'm not buying that it's going to be a committee. I think that Ben Roethlisberger is going to point to James Conner and be like, that's the guy I want in the game, not Anthony McFarland, not Benny Snell. The guy that I trust, that has my trust factor. And that's James Conner.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on what Evan said, I put out an article at PFF, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and James Conner was my top guy to target. I talked about Adam Thielen at receiver and James Conner at running back. And if you get those 2 guys in the 3rd and 4th round, you're going to feel really good. You should feel really good, right, about your draft. And I think Evan hit everything, on the head there. The one other thing I would say is, and I don't want to I know we've all heard that Tomlin likes the feature runner, and it's true. Tomlin has gone to a feature runner. So whenever he says he likes it, it's actually true. He's done that multiple years. But I dug into those quotes, and what I found really interesting, Evan, is he actually goes on to tell you why he's that way. And what he talks about is because in their scheme, they run a lot of power, a lot of pulling stuff. He wants his running back and his offensive line to literally be, he said it has to be synced up perfect, right? In his opinion, to make that kind of run game work. And he said that's why he's always been a bell cow guy, because he believes that if he finds one guy that's in mesh with that line, which James Conner's already shown to do, and they trust him, he trusts, they all trust each other. He says that he bases his whole offense off of that. So it isn't just something where, Mike Tomlin is blindly saying, oh, I just want to go with a bell cow guy because, I'm old school. And I believe you just give a back and, all the carries because you should. He's actually got a thought process behind this, and it's about, making all the aspects of the running game work. It's not just about the running back itself. So I'm getting James Conner pretty much every single time I can. And I'm like Evan, if I don't take a running back in the 2nd round, I love going running back, getting one of the elite tight ends or maybe a receiver that you want, and then coming back in the 3rd and getting James Conner. I feel like Conner, I have him, scoring the same points as Chubb and Jacobs and all those guys. So I feel great.
Evan, let me ask you this. Let's say we take that running back in the 1st round. We're coming back through the 2nd round. Give me some receivers who, if you see their names in the 2nd round, you're willing to pull the trigger on them over a running back in the 1st round. Of course, it matters where you are in the draft, but just in general.
The first guy that stands out is Julio Jones. Julio Jones, I think at this point is my highest owned early round receiver. And he makes it to the 2nd round almost every single time that I'm drafting. And, like I'm smashing that button whenever he makes it to me. And then like Dwain, very potentially targeting James Conner, who has been one of my highest drafted running backs. So that is a scenario that I really, really like, coming out of round one with a true RB1, taking Julio Jones, and then getting James Conner in the third.
You ever get to a point where you're like, I want to target tight end early, or are you a wait on tight end kind of guy?
I'm a very much like take an elite tight end or wait. I'm skeptical of that middle round tier of, Higbee and Austin Hooper and Gronk and, even Evan Ingram and Darren Waller to some extent. I like taking an elite tight end or just waiting and grabbing two late round, true late round tight ends like Mike Gesicki, Ian Thomas,
Jonnu
so
Smith. I mean, there's a ton of them.
Yeah, TJ Hawkinson.
Yep.
This is the deepest tight end year that I've ever seen.
Let's get into some fun stuff here. Now, Dwain did an article where he talked about, or a series of tweets, and he stirred up lots of trolls, and he didn't even, mention Josh Allen, which usually is what you have to do. We're going to get a sounder. I'll get that as the season goes in of called Don't Feed the Trolls or something. We'll have a great segment there, but about basically rookie running backs coming in and not taking over for established vets. Now we've got Jonathan Taylor against Marlon Mack. We've got J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram. We've got DeAndre Swift and Kerryon Johnson. Evan, I was listening earlier today. You were on another podcast, and you said you love targeting guys like Marlon Mack and Kerryon Johnson in the mid rounds. Basically, that same sort of point. There's tons of value there. And do we believe that these rookies are going to come in and just take right over from these established veterans? So, Dwain, you can kind of explain your theory on that a little bit, and then I'd love to hear Evan's points on why he likes smashing Mack and Kerryon in the mid rounds.
Yeah. So Evan, it was all over Twitter. Everybody's super excited. And my thought process, based on the way I grade these things and do my projections and the process I work through, was that, I love Jonathan Taylor. I love him, but I feel he's overpriced. I'm much more likely to want Swift or Akers at their price than, JT in the third. Now, when JT slips to the fourth, I'm willing to go for it. But it just got me to thinking, how much do we underestimate or overestimate when a young running back lands, with a veteran? So what I did is I went back and I looked at every second round running back pick since 2007. And then I looked at who was the incumbent, in the situation. And I basically I categorized those into a few different buckets. One, you have a running back who landed in a wide open situation. So for example, Amir Abdullah landed behind Joyce Bell, who had been solid the year before, but he was hurt and and Reggie Bush wasn't involved yet. He wasn't there yet. And so you have Amir Abdullah clearly in the second round as this guy everybody loved, right? He's landing in this wide open backfield. Okay. He missed. But the other category is you land behind an aging vet. So the examples, for this one, think Carlos Hyde landing behind Frank Gore, right? Derrick Henry landing behind DeMarco Murray. You think about Frank Gore's on here multiple times. Michael James landing behind Frank Gore. Frank Gore is like,
Frank Gore is like our mascot, is because every year he screws me over. He's late and runs in my face.
Isaiah Peed, not a great player, but he was a second round back. He landed behind Steven Jackson, who was old. Hell, Ray Rice in his rookie year landed behind LaRon McClain and Willis McGahee and couldn't take the roll away. So then obviously you have some that just land behind studs or really solid players. You land behind Adrian Peterson, while he's still in his prime. Toby Gerhardt don't miss. Come on. Doesn't matter. And then there are certain guys that landed in roles where they just landed with a passing down back. So anyway, here's how it broke down. When I broke it into those buckets, there were 11 total backs that landed in situations we would consider wide open. 6 of them hit in the top 36. They had a top 36 fantasy PPR season, so a 55% hit rate. The backs that landed behind either an aging or what we would consider a wash starter, right? Not an elite starter, but just a solid, starter. If you look at that across all 11, either aging or just solid starters, only 1 hit out of 11. All the rest, were misses. So people just assume that these backs are going to come in, and it's not that they're not good. but like, J.K. Dobbins is going to face it with Ingram. At least he's priced less, right? You're going to have the same thing with JT facing it with Marlon Mack. I mean, he's a guy that's had, 1,000-yard season. Has he had some problems with injuries? Yeah. But to think that he's just Jonathan Taylor in year one is just going to immediately blow him out, I think is, we're being a little bit foolhardy. And again, I like getting exposure to the player when he slides. But what are your thoughts, Evan, on, kind of that breakdown? How are you seeing these rookies this year? Any that you're targeting, any you're avoiding, just lay it out on folks.
Well, I think there's some truth to the notion that because this year teams had less information on players, there was almost no pro day circuit. Teams did not really get to meet with players as much as they usually would, that the running backs were almost across the board overdrafted. I never thought that Zach Moss would be a 3rd-round pick. I thought he would be a 5th to 6th-round pick. Cam Akers went in the 2nd round. I thought he would be a 3rd to 4th-round pick. LaMichael Pirine went in the 4th round. I thought he would be like a 6th to 7th-round pick. A.J. Dillon went in the 2nd, and PFF didn't even have him as a top 250 overall player. And I think that part of that was due to the fact that teams with less information were going to try to hit singles and doubles more so than trying to hit home runs. And you can get solid running backs that are singles and doubles. And I think that teams opted for that, and therefore the running backs were sort of pushed up teams' draft boards. I think that, like Darrington Evans, even out of App State. I mean, I liked him. I remember liking him before the draft, but I thought he would be a 5th, 6th, 7th-round pick. He went, in the 3rd. So I think that, there definitely is some merit to fading these running backs that a lot of people are assuming are going to jump into significant roles right away, especially when, they might have been overdrafted across the board. And now they have 14 days of padded practices, no exhibition games to show their talents and prove that they know where they need to be on the field. So I like Marlon Mack. I like Kerryon Johnson, and these guys you can get in the 9th, 10th, even 11th rounds. Yeah. And I think that there's a very good chance that those guys can lead their backfields to begin the season. Like Marlon Mack and Kerryon Johnson are good players. Yeah. Marlon Mack was top 10 in the NFL last year in rushing yards per game. Kerryon Johnson, when he's been healthy, has shown the traits of being an every down back. I like taking discounts on those proven veterans in situations where the rookies are going to be behind.
Remember Tevin Coleman's rookie year and how he shot ahead of Devontae Freeman, who was only a 2nd-year player at the time? What place did Devontae Freeman finish that year in fantasy running back?
He was overall RB1.
One. Yeah. So I'm with Evan. I like, getting those guys in those rounds. And I don't particularly like target just one. It's if one of them slides into the 10th round, and I'll see a lot of folks there. And I love going for, some of the really great handcuffs like Pollard and Madison, and I love those things. But I think people underestimate the fact that, if one of the rookies, either A, can't get on the field because of the things Evans laid out, that's one way, or B, they get hurt, right, which is another way. Marlon Mack's behind one of the best offensive lines in the league and what's going to be a good offense, and all of a sudden, so he has – it's funny, people's thought process, I don't think they think Marlon Mack carries the value that Tony Pollard does. And I'm like, actually, he should be drafted before Tony Pollard because he has multiple paths to being on the field, whereas Pollard's basically got one. He needs Zeke to be hurt. And if that goes down, great. It's awesome. But drafting, Pollard and some of these other guys ahead of Kerryon Johnson, Marlon Mack, I'm with Evan. I think, it's a bit foolhardy. I will say, Evan, that I want to get your thoughts on these two guys. Because of that research that I did, I am willing to look at Akers, when he slides into the 6th and even the late 5th, because what did Darrell Henderson show us? What has Malcolm Brown shown us? So while there could be concerns about them getting ready, it's like, man, I don't know how much the coaches trust what they already have. And, and again, not like this is a huge data set, but in the examples where these guys landed in these wide open situations, it's 55%, at least half of them hit. So, I mean, for him, and then I think Swift is the other guy. The thing I like about Swift is, he has shown to be able to be a true 3-down guy, right? He can play in the passing game. He can play, in the running game. I mean, can he be ready? I think is a very, very legit, question. But if I'm drafting a rookie running back, it's very likely to be one of those two, because I feel like just their path is so much easier to getting on the field and staying on the field, versus these other guys that have to challenge some of these better veterans.
It's a fantasy football.
Yeah,
Also,
DeAndre Swift has been one of my highest owned rookie running backs. And another large part of that is, and I'm willing to take him and Kerryon Johnson on the same team, like DeAndre Swift in the 7th, Kerryon in the 11th,
Yeah.
People say, oh, that'll limit your upside, but we're talking about 7th and 11th round picks. So that's also an offense that I believe in because of what they showed over the first 8 games of last year. They were the Lions were on pace to finish top 8 in the NFL in points scored and top 4 in yardage. And so, throwing a 7th and 11th round draft pick at, the clear cut 2 top running backs in that offense, I think is smart, whether it be in redraft or best ball. I mean, that's just not a lot of draft capital to spend on. And at the end of the day, like they might both be factors. I think that's in play as well.
Yeah. Evan, I think you and I are both in a 14-team draft this weekend, the Kings Classic, which unfortunately isn't being held at the Pro Football Hall of Fame like we did last year. But that's a 14-team league. Guys like Marlon Mack and Kerryon Johnson could be flex starters in 14-team leagues.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Don't forget about these guys.
And what also is working in the favor of Marlon Mack, and Dwayne hit on a little bit of it earlier, one of the best offensive lines in the league. They return all 5 starters. The Colts have come out and said publicly multiple times that Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack are going to open the season as, a 1-2 punch. And the Colts also drew the easiest schedule in the league based on opponent win totals, and that should contribute to positive game script for Marlon Mack, even if he's only a 9 to 13 touch per game guy. He, as you mentioned, he can be a flex starter.
It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Brian Drake, Dwain McFarland. Our guest is Evan Silva, co-founder of EstablishTheRun.com. Go over there, check out their draft kit, $34.99. You're going to get a $25 FFPC coupon to play in a league there. The rankings, the tiers, the articles, everything you've grown to love from Evan over the years on steroids. It's tremendous, folks. I've paid for it myself. It's awesome stuff. Hey, and if you're into NBA stuff, ETR's got basketball now. So go over there and check that out. I know Drew Dinkmeyer's doing great work over there. And if you're watching on YouTube, and I can see the numbers, and a lot of you are, hit that subscribe button to help us out at the Fantasy Football Hustle YouTube page. All right, I'm going to need you guys to sell me on a guy here. The fantasy world is now abuzz with Antonio Gibson from the Washington football team. So this guy was a 3rd-round pick out of Memphis. In his 2 years at Memphis, he had 44 receptions, 10 touchdowns. He only had 33 rushing attempts. So now, I mean, is this guy really a running back? We know that Geis was released. You still got AP there. This guy is Terminator. He never dies. He had almost 900 yards last year. You still got Bryce Love creeping around. The corpse of Peyton Barber's there. This is a terrible offensive line, too. Brandon Thorne has him ranked 30th over there on ETR. I mean, you got to sell me here on this. Evan, you got him at RB 29. Is this just all upside? Someone's got to be a playmaker on this dreadful team?
I think I have him at RB 32. But here's the thing with Antonio Gibson. So, you're pulling out Darius Geis. What playmakers do they have really to scheme the ball to? I mean, it's Terry McLaurin and then a whole lot of nothing. I mean, I guess you could include Adrian Peterson, potentially Bryce Love in there. But Antonio Gibson has the ability to work in the slot. He's an excellent receiver. And I think that what you would be hoping for from Antonio Gibson would be 4, 5, 6 targets per game, 4, 5, 6 carries per game, and for them to manufacture touches to him because they just don't have a whole lot of other skill position player talent. And where I put him right around the number 80 overall player. And when you start to look at guys that, I put him ahead of, they're just really not, they're like RB3/4s, a wide receiver like John Brown, who probably has a limited ceiling, with Stephon Diggs there. I have him like as an RB3/flex option with upside because of his athletic profile and because, where else are they going to go with the ball? So that's where I stand on Antonio Gibson. I didn't see that pathway clearing until for him to get, consistent touches until Darius Geis, got released. But now I think that pathway is there for him. And, taking him in the 7th or 8th round makes a lot of sense. Now, I've seen him go sometimes like in the 5th round. I would never do that. But I do think that in the 7th or 8th round, I think that he makes a lot of sense as an upside pick.
And both Yahoo and ESPN only have him listed as a running back. I know some people thought like, hey, maybe he's going to get dual eligibility at wide receiver running back. That's not the case right now. What do you think of him, Dwayne?
Yeah, I've got him right in the same range, as Evan. I was checking my ranks, and you're right, Drake. For whatever reason, he's not updated in there. But in my tier article, I've got him right there in the 30 range. He didn't move. He moved up more based on the upside to get some more touches, but I didn't change his actual projections a whole lot. Where my head was at before was that he was probably going to be one of their top 3 or 4 targets anyway, on the team if you had a pecking order. And now I think he easily could be the 2nd most targeted player. So I don't have him down for a ton, of rushing, attempts. I have Adrian Peterson still leading the backfield with 215 rushing attempts, but I'm similar to where Evan's at, on the receiving. I've got 118 rushing attempts, 3 rushing touchdowns, 473 yards. But in the passing game, I've got him, at almost 50 receptions, 450 yards and another 3 touchdowns. So, you could be getting up around, 800-900 total yards, 6-7 touchdowns. And I agree with Evan. I think there's even, the touchdowns, there's probably not a lot of upside from there, but there's a little more upside on the receptions and the yardage.
I think that's a guy who in your home league with your buddies drinking in a garage, you're going to blow them away. They're not going to have any idea who he is. They're going to be like, who's this guy? Antonio, isn't that the bar from, the show, The League? Like, they don't know. So, all right. On this show, I don't think there's a player that I've hated more than Ronald Jones over the past few years. So now he's in Tampa with Brady and Gronk, and we've got no risk it, no biscuit, and they got rid of Peyton Barber, so he's kind of there, and he's the de facto guy, and it's almost the kiss of death that Bruce Arians gave him the preseason quote of love, because we saw that a year ago with Peyton Barber. It's kind of one of those things, Evan. It's like, what the hell else is there? He's going to fall into the end zone a bunch of times. We assume there's Keyshawn Vaughn, who's a rookie, who you can get at a great value, by the way, and stash him at the end of drafts if you can. But what do we make of Ronald Jones this year in this Tampa offense?
Well, I still think that the person that is going to determine which running back plays the most snaps, gets the most touches, is used the most in the Bucs backfield is Tom Brady. Yeah. And Tom Brady is going to, again, rely on that trust factor. And I still think it's pretty wide open in Tampa Bay. That's why I have him like as a middle round pick. He's got some upside. I think he had a better second season than is widely remembered. But is he? He really doesn't profile as the type of guy that a veteran quarterback would trust. He has really struggled in pass protection. In particular, he's not a guy that has been reliable in terms of being in the right place at the right time. So there is, plenty of downside there, but I think in the middle rounds, I think he's worth a shot. I think that if he starts to move up into like the 5th or even like 4th round, then totally out on him. Yeah. But as a 7th or 8th round, RB3/4/ flex option, I think Ronald Jones does make sense. But I also think that there's a good chance that there's going to be, a multi-back committee in Tampa Bay. They're not just going to suddenly commit to one back. Dario Ogunbowale is still there. And Tom Brady is going to make make the call as to who's going to be on the field. So you can't really feel comfortable in Ronald Jones, I don't think. But I think he's largely priced appropriately.
Yeah, that's a guy doing where Tom Brady needs to go. Hey, Devonta Freeman, why don't you stop worrying about getting a paycheck and just come down here and block for me, and I'll dump the ball off to you 75 times.
To Evan's point, he did have a better season than some people remember. My biggest thing, and I agree on the Tom Brady front, right? I think it's going to be a committee. I also agree that, look, if you want to take a swing, I have him in my tier 8 running back 3. I call it glass half empty or half full ? It's really kind of up to you. I lay out everything about each of these players, but Mark Ingram, DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, Ronald Jones, Raheem Mostert, Devin Singletary, Antonio Gibson, they're all in the same tier, for different reasons. But it's really the community is divided on a lot of these guys because a lot of it is on some of them just don't have enough data. On others, so that creates, speculation. On others, we have a really short, a small sample set, or on guys like Ronald Jones, like for me, like how could he not take the job away from Peyton Barber? I mean, if he was going to show that he could really be a dominant back that could do everything, he would have taken the job from Peyton Barber. Bruce Arians didn't trust him inside the 5. He only had 15% of the team attempts inside the 5. He only played 36% of the snaps. And by the way, he didn't trust him on passing downs either. So, I mean, he only ran a route on 24% of dropbacks, right? And Dare Agambawale, like, Evan laid out, could very easily be that guy. And if we want to listen to coach speak, and we're listening to Bruce Arians, he was also just gushing around LaShawn McCoy because he thinks he's a great receiver. And that could be the guy that Tom Brady ends up trusting, even though we may all think LaShawn McCoy's washed. And so McCoy landing there didn't really make me move my ranking on Ronald Jones. It basically stayed where it was at, so I'm not that worried about it. But I already expected him to be a slight lead and a really good offense, but still in what will be a 3-man committee.
All right, Evan, before we get you out of here, any running backs you're just avoiding? You're like, I'm out on these guys. I'm not leaving my draft with these people. So let the fans know maybe some running backs you should leave on the board for your friends.
Well, and I want to get Dwayne's take on this too, but Leonard Fournette. So I think that there is a general feeling that his workload is safe, and I don't know that that's the case. I don't even know if his roster spot is necessarily safe because they already tried to, they spent the offseason trying to trade him. And, we were on him last year. We had him above ADP. I drafted him, quite a bit. He caught 76 passes. He got 100 targets. He scored very few touchdowns, but I don't – how many touchdowns are this year's Jaguars going to score? They have the lowest –
4.
Yeah, right. They have the lowest team total in the NFL. I think they're legitimately tanking, sort of like the Dolphins were last year. Obviously the coaches and the players are going to try to win on the field, but have you seen the immense amount of talent that the Jaguars have given up from their defense that was dominant in 2017? I mean, they've lost like everybody that was critical on those teams. I think that DJ Shark is the buy in Jacksonville and not Leonard Fournette. Certainly not in the 3rd round. Now, when he starts to go in the 4th, 5th, 6th, I get it. But in the 3rd round, I just think there's a lot higher floor and probably even higher upside options that are available in that round than, a running back that his own team doesn't want, that nobody else in the league wanted. And that, is going to get eaten into his workload by potentially Chris Thompson, by potentially Raquel Armstead, Divine Ozigbo. This is an offense that I want to avoid outside of betting on, comeback game scripts wherein I think that DJ Shark can rally and Gardner Minshew even can have some spiked weeks. But with Leonard Fournette, that's a guy that I want other people to draft so that it pushes other players to me that I actually want.
Yeah, I've never taken him. And I think, the Chris Thompson thing is a bigger deal than I know people want to dismiss it. Here's the problem. Leonard Fournette, people keep saying he's a good receiver. He's not. He catches swing passes. Now, that's not to say that can't be productive. We just talked about it with Derrick Henry, right? We would love it because in fantasy, that's still points. So from a fantasy perspective, it's fine. But that's not the type of, passing routes that, Jay Gruden really wants to operate with, so he's shown a willingness, multiple times, going back to his time in Cincinnati when he had Ben Jarvis, Green, Ellis, and then who was the Scott guy, the guy out of like Abilene or something, that he kept trying to use all those years, Evan, that was Bernard Scott.
Bernard Scott.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a long-standing thing with Jay Gruden. And look, I'm not one to say that just because a coach did something means they do it forever. But when he actively goes out and grabs, Chris Thompson, he's going to fit the offense better. And, Evan, I think you already said it. Leonard Fournette's volatile anyway. He could do something just dumb on his own that, gets him, suspended
ejected from a game like he did.
Ends up
and cost Dwayne a ton of money.
Yes, he did cost me a ton of money in that game. I've given Leonard Fournette a few chances in my life, and they were happy. I actually was right on when to do it, but then he screwed me. But anyway, that's for another conversation. So I'm with you. I just don't find myself taking him. The other guy, I know we need to go here of him, but my other guy, and I think he's priced okay, but I just don't pull the trigger, and it's David Johnson. And it's because when I look at it, I'm like, man, I love David Johnson when he's going to get receptions. When he's going to be used, more like Carlos Hyde, and I'm not sure how much passing game work he's going to get, at a minimum, Duke Johnson's going to take some of that, right? So I hear a lot on Twitter, oh, man, he's a lock for 12 or 14%. I'm like, man, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I'm thinking more like 8 to 10% for him, and 8 to 10%, for Duke also. I just don't see him getting up to the 14, 15%, which would get him into that 70, 80 catch range. And man, I'm sorry. Like when I watched, and this isn't about going back and watching the game where he was hurt and everybody thought he looked, like he needed a walker. This has been coming on for a couple of seasons. So if you look at his missed tackles per attempt, and last year he faced, an 8-man box hardly ever. The Cardinals were second in the league in yards blocked, before contact, behind only the Ravens. And he still couldn't, get his act together. His yards, after contact are down in the 2s, which isn't good. Again, the attempts tackled, the tackles avoided per attempt have dropped down to 6%. And this has been on a decline. This isn't just that, all of a sudden he had one little blip on the radar. I'm a little concerned that, I think he'll get enough rushing volume, but I worry that if he doesn't get the passing volume, people are going to be disappointed. He could end up actually being more like Carlos Hyde than we think.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and Deshaun Watson is not a big check down quarterback anyway. And if he does fall into that Carlos Hyde role where he's really just an interior runner, I mean, that's the worst thing that David Johnson does as a player is run between the tackles. And that's been the case for him since he came out of college. He's got major injury risk. He's also a guy, to me, Dwayne, that actually I took him a couple times really early in the draft process, like in the 6th round, but now he goes in the 4th round. I've seen him actually go in the 2nd round, the late 2nd round. There's no way I'm touching him before the 6th round. And even in the 6th, I'm like trying to talk myself out of
it. Me too.
Yeah. So, Evan, the last thing I'll ask you before we get you out of here, we want to be mindful of your time. Thanks for giving us an hour here on The Hustle. I'm always curious, what is it like to be a guy like Evan Silva on Twitter? Like, what does your timeline look like when you open your phone or whatever and you hit that? Is there just like 8,000 notifications and everyone's asking you who to start and sit and should I trade for this guy and that guy and DM? Like, is it nuts?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah, no doubt.
You do an amazing job of keeping up with a lot of it, man. I have to say, like, you respond to quite a few people.
I try to. Yeah.
I've thought about it. I'm like, man, if I had that many, because sometimes, I mean, I don't have near as many followers as you, and I still miss stuff sometimes. And I try to respond as much as I can. There's certain people that I see all the time that are just trolls, and you're like, I just ignore them. But man, it's got to be taxing to keep up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not complaining, but
no,
it can be a lot at times, no question.
And you get guys jumping in your mentions talking about like Tyler Higbee and stuff. I mean,
he is at Evan Silva on Twitter. Dwayne is at Dwain McFarland. Spell it DWAIN McFarland. I am at Drake Fantasy. And if you follow any of those guys, please, for the love of God, I have like 8 followers, so feel free to hop in and hear bad takes about Syracuse basketball. But, go over to establishtheRun.com. the ETR draft kit is one of the best values in fantasy football, $34.99. Trust me, the content is off the charts. You can even pull up, you love Evan's tiers. He has a color-coded PDF where you can basically just print this thing off and have the tiers of all the players and bring it right to your draft and dominate with your buddies. So, Evan, we really appreciate the time, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, fellas.
Cool. All right, guys. That's the great Evan Silva. We appreciate it. Stick around later in the week. We're going to have John Hansen, the fantasy guru himself from fantasypoints.com, coming on Thursday. And then over the weekend, Dwayne's going to sit sidecar with me for once as I do the Kings Classic draft, and he critiques it and tells me what an idiot as I am.
I'm going to rip your draft up, Drake. I'm going to shred it.
Well, Joe Dolan and Matt Camp did it last year live in front of me, so it'll be no.
You should do good. I mean, hopefully. I think you're going to do
controls
well.
over to you. But yeah. So that's the Fantasy Football Hustle, folks. Evan Silva, again, follow him, go to ETR, check out all the good stuff. We appreciate it. And folks, we will see you next time on the Fantasy Football Hustle. Take care.